Live from the UK, broadcasting around the world, you're listening to Talking Minaret, discussing matters that affect you, streaming to the world and beyond.
Welcome to Talking Minaret. Today I'm joined by another special brother, Asad. He frequently involves himself with community dawah. Asad, it's great to have you here.
Nice to speak to you, brother.
How's quarantine life?
Oh, alhamdulillah, quarantine life is, to be honest, it is quite boring. But alhamdulillah, this is the time we need to make most of, with our families in terms of worship and whatever dawah we could do, really, by any means. So alhamdulillah, it's, like I say, it's a boring time, but at the same time, we can use it to, earn a lot more reward as we have more free time. People aren't working, everybody's indoors. So yeah, alhamdulillah, it's good.
So from last week, we understood from the information that we have that this wasn't a staged outbreak. So post-coronavirus, people are asking the question, is China going to take the realms of power? Is it going to become the next superpower? Reports suggesting the US and China are both treating the pandemic as an opportunity to maneuver, so things might be changing around. Did America use this event to sideline China as a growing economic power? Because remember, China's economy got affected by this as well. World media is also exposing China's information control and China's totalitarianism. I read an interesting report the other day that MarketWatch reports that experts say the current trends indicate the crisis will leave it in a much stronger position geopolitically relative to United States. What's your opinion on this?
I mean, if you look at China, like you mentioned, China is very different in terms of United States, in terms of how it manages its citizens, in terms of how it controls information. So yes, America, although is suffering a lot. So I think the last report I've seen was like 33 million Americans, being made unemployed. So yes, through this pandemic, America has taken a lot of beating, but you got to remember there's companies in China as well, which have, because of the pandemic, are going bust and have gone bust. But like I say, China, the way it controls its information, it's a lot more strict in terms of how it leaks our information compared to the US. Going forward, yes, China currently, if you look at the global power of China in terms of trading, in terms of investing, China is obviously the world's top exporting and trading country. And compared with America, even at the moment, it holds quite a strong foothold. So, it's got CPEC projects with Pakistan. I think they've invested in Sri Lanka. It's got its One Belt and One Road initiative across Asia. They invested billions of dollars to build infrastructure, which will connect China to the rest of the world. If you look at it from that angle, it is in a stronger position compared to America in terms of global investment and trading. Is doing a lot better in my opinion. And going forward for the foreseeable future, I think it will remain in that position, especially once its projects come to fruit. So, for example, the One Belt and Road initiative, its CPEC projects, once they bear fruit, it will be in a stronger position economically, in investment wise as well, in terms of global investment as well.
We're looking at it from the economic angle, but while America is trying to cope with this pandemic and even the European nations, China is taking certain political actions. In my opinion, the President Xi Jinping was described by the Serbian president Alexander Vučić as saying he said about Xi Jinping that not only is a dear friend but as a brother, because China provided Serbia with much needed medical supplies which were initially denied by the EU. It's trying to establish itself as some kind of global hero at this moment. China and Russia sent doctors and medical supplies to Bosnia and Serbia in March, while the EU provided 3.6 billion worth of aid amidst the coronavirus crisis. So what I'm trying to say is that it seems like that China is taking political actions, building friendships, building alliances. What do you think?
Yeah, even like you mentioned, China, even some of America's previous allies, is trying to build relationships with them and move forward politically in terms of getting their foothold across, having some kind of influence across the world. I mean, the question is that enough for China, to become that world superpower? So if you talk about China's economic activity, its domestic activity, if we look locally, I mean, although it does come across as really in a strong position, but China does has its own issues as well. Like I say, I mean, through the pandemic, it's done a lot better than how US has handled the pandemic, basically, including the UK. They made a total shambles of it. So yes, they exporting equipment across the world, the PPE equipment, and they're providing this kind of stuff. But that stuff alone is enough for China to remove US from the global stage. I mean, if you look at China, is population 1 billion people. I mean, they've had one-child policy for, I don't know, over 30 years now, which has a direct result. They've got aging population now, which is predominantly male. Their youth domestically are leaving China and going abroad to work. So overall, in the near future, that's going to have an effect on his workforce. So yes, China, like I say, has its own issues. Along with America through this pandemic. America, I mean, since Trump has come into power, and he did create millions of jobs across America. But now through this pandemic, that's all been undone. Like I say, 30 plus Americans have been made redundant. But yeah, I mean, China, it is trying to make that global influence. But I don't think going forward if you look in the future, I don't think it's doing enough. But there's other factors in play as well, which I will discuss during this podcast.
The bit about the aging population thing, though, what China's doing with their youth, sending them abroad free of charge. You read stories about how a lot of academic research and development institutions have already been penetrated by the Chinese state by them sending students from China to study and take the knowledge and bring it back to the homeland.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, I would say, 100% the economic angle, but China seems to be doing other things as well on the side.
No, I totally agree. There's a lot of activity. Yeah, they are doing loads of, like you mentioned, in terms of how they're trying to build relationships with other governments, in terms of investment, in terms of business. They are doing a lot. But going forward, what we're discussing is, I mean, in terms of will it become that global superpower? And in my opinion, it's a no. And like I said, going forward, I'll give some examples as we go through the podcast in terms of why I think it's a no. But I mean, even if you look domestically at China, I mean, the way the global capitalist economy works, you've got foreign companies investing in China, but they're not succeeding. So, for example, when Uber operated in China, within a few years, it was taken out by a local state-backed ride-hailing app called Didi. So they didn't succeed. They went out of business. They had to leave. I mean, you got Starbucks chains I was reading recently across China. But China, I can't remember the name of the company now, but it's a local, like a company within China who was giving them competition. It was an app-based company, and they were selling their coffee for literally $1 a coffee. And so what China is doing is these businesses are coming into China investing, but they're not succeeding. So they're failing and they're going because China's got its own like an in-house kind of business by his own entrepreneurs. Like you mentioned, people are going abroad, studying and coming back. But the Chinese people themselves, you got some of the biggest internet companies like Alibaba, they've got their own WeChat, Facebook and these kind of social media apps aren't allowed to operate there. They've got their own versions of it. So like I say, the way the global industry works, capitalist industry, if China does want to take that next step and move forward just from investment and building relationships with other countries, just because other countries are building business relationships with China, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to give that authority to China to become the next world superpower.
There's a quote from, Mitt Romney. He said that China is most likely to become a sole global superpower by the middle of this century. The only way a relatively small country like us, i.e. America, can confront a much larger country like China is by linking arms with our friends rather than shouting America first and squishing the NATO effort and also abandoning the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, that was going to occur, but that got squashed as well. So circumstantially, can China become a superpower because of the mistakes that America is doing and the European countries are also doing? I mean, like you mentioned before, the fact that the way the Chinese handled the virus outbreak was a lot different than the way the Europeans did, certainly UK and America. Circumstantially, do you think that China could take the power from, say, America because of what's happened?
I mean, again, no, I'll say no, because what China is doing is, for the foreseeable future, it will, like I say, it will be in a stronger position compared to America in terms of the relationships it's building and in terms of its economic power. But that alone, going forward, isn't enough. The steps it's taking China currently, are they enough to remove America from the global stage?
Let's go on to why it's a no, why it's not enough.
Look, first of all, if we look at China and America, although China claims that it's a communist state, in reality, they're both capitalist states. So basically, for any country to go to war, they will need to have contradictory ideas. So if they carry the same ideology, there's very slim chances of one country which lives by capitalism will try and remove another country which is already ruling by capitalism, i.e. America. So you have China, and on top of that, China alone ain't strong enough to do this. It needs the backing of other countries, other nations. And at the moment, the way China is, at least the other European countries will not accept, or even countries around the world. The question is, will they accept China as being the world superpower? And the answer at the moment is no.
So you're looking at it from an ideological perspective, and also with that comes America's influence over the other nations, i.e. more recently Trump's support for Boris Johnson as Prime Minister of the UK, US plans to demonize the Labour Party. It seems that a lot of UK projects aren't independent from US projects, especially within the Middle East. US has that influence, and also ideologically, I think personally, maybe you can clarify, I think many people think that capitalism as an ideology is just about money making. Is there more to it?
This is where the people, I think, are getting confused, and this is where the idea that China is going to become the next global superpower. This is where they get this idea from. Like I say, just because China is doing well in terms of investing globally and stuff, and is basically on the front foot at the moment in comparison to the US, they seem to have this idea China is going to become the next world superpower. If we scratch the surface, so like I say, look, first of all, although China claims it's a communist country, it's a capitalist country. And you could tell the way. A simple example would be if it was a communist state, from the doctor to the cleaner, everybody would be on the same wage. And we know that isn't the case, right? So it's a capitalist country, and so is America. So this is the way I basically see it, and why China won't be the global superpower. So first of all, I mentioned it's got no backing of the rest from other countries across the world. Now, just because countries are doing business with China, it doesn't mean they're going to accept it as a world superpower. So straight away is on a back foot. So the rest of the countries, including Europe, they won't accept China as a global superpower. If they were to, they'll have to take it to that next step where they sideline the United States. So you've got the United States petrodollar, which keeps billions and billions of dollars pouring into its economy. They'll have to, all of the countries united will have to sideline the US's petrodollar and start working with China and basically start using the Chinese currency as a global trading currency. So we know the rest of the countries, the leaders, they won't be willing to do that, and they don't see China at that level. I will also extend it to the people on the ground. So, for example, there's no appetite amongst the people, amongst society, to have that common thought and concepts where they're accepting China as the world superpower. So the reason why I think that's important is because if any countries across the world, for example, don't accept China as the world superpower, then the people on the ground can pressurize them and force them into accepting, China as the world superpower. And we know that isn't the case as well. The world has no appetite. People on the ground, in fact, if anything, they're more scared of China than they are of America in terms of how China manages its citizenship and the censor they have in terms of the media and in terms of the spying that goes on the Chinese citizenships. Yeah. So there's no government backing across the world. On the ground, people won't accept China as a world superpower. Going forward, it just simply by doing trade and building relationships, it won't have the authority to take over the world and become that superpower like America is, and how America dominates the global stage. Like you mentioned, you gave example of UK, how he sidelined Jeremy Corbyn and bought Boris Johnson. Well, not exactly bought, but backed Boris Johnson into power.
It sounds like you're saying that there's a lot more ideologically, and it reminds me, you mentioned about communism and capitalism. They were both developed as a reaction to the failure of Christianity in looking after the daily affairs of people.
Exactly.
Because Christianity is just a spiritual creed. It doesn't have the ideological aspect in which it gives rules in relation to governance.
Exactly.
Uh, for these capitalists, the concept of halal and haram doesn't exist. When it comes to personal conduct, it's subjective from one society to another. In the capitalist ideology, the view of man's nature, the relationship between the individual and the society, and the function of the state is that, in its view of the nature of man, is that man is inherently good and not bad. The whole man is inherently bad comes from Christianity, the whole original sin thing.
Yeah.
So they believe that any evil that is committed by man is a result of restricting his will, his freedoms. For this reason, the capitalists call for freeing man's will in order so he can express the good of his nature, and hence the whole concept of freedom. So you're right. I get what you're saying in terms of the whole. Many people are looking at it from a minimalist standpoint, i.e., China's becoming economically powerful, but becoming a superpower and having a vision for the world is a lot more than just having money in the bag. It has a whole load of principles in relation to how to govern people and how to have people live by a set of values. And freedom is one of those values that epitomizes capitalist way of life, but freedom without restriction, and hence we have all these ills within society. And so hence protecting man's freedom is a state function, and hence individualism, privatization, the disparity of wealth, and the disparity of wealth between the 1% and the rest of society, and hence the rich get rich and the poor get poor.
Yeah, I mean, if like we're talking about ideology and how communism, the communism as an ideology is completely dead now. Even the Chinese people, they don't embrace communism as an ideology. Like I say, they live by capitalism. Then that leaves capitalism, which is dominant in the world today. And people have seen the misery, and you've given some examples in terms of distribution of wealth, how it's unfair, and there's loads of examples to give. And people have experienced capitalism now for decades, and across the world, people are fed up of it. But at the moment, they don't have an alternative, and this is where Islam differs. But if I just focus on China again and America becoming the world superpower, and see, like you mentioned, also people are just concentrating on this one side of China in terms of its, in terms of its trade and economic and its global investment and stuff. But they're failing to realize what actually makes a country a world superpower. Now, the way America, obviously after the World War II, delegates around the world agreed that the exchange rates would be rooted in gold, with the US dollar being the reserve currency. So you had the whole, basically, countries across the world agreeing to give America that authorization, basically that a buyer in a way that, you can lead us in the global dominance as a global police state, basically. And like I say, at the moment, nobody's willing to do that for China. And China has no alternative to offer. If it was to become a global superpower, it's going to, you're not going to replace capitalism with capitalism. It's got no alternative to offer. It's going to be exactly the same thing. So hence the appetite there in the first place. So this is where I say Islam differs, because Islam does have the alternative as an ideology. So this is, I also mentioned, the people on the ground, how the sentiments, the common thought amongst society. So if Islam was to take that global stage, and even if the governments didn't agree, which more than likely they wouldn't want Islam to be dominate our world stage, you will have people on the ground, who don't have this sheep mentality and who will think for themselves and think, what, we've had enough of this capitalism ruining our lives for decades on end. And now here we have Islam, which is providing an alternative way of life for us. it offers something different where instead of worshipping and following man's desires, it brings them to the worship of Allah and His laws. So the people on the ground themselves will more than likely be willing to pressurize the governments and, put pressure on the government to accept Islam as a dominant force and, put America to the side. So yeah, that's the different angle of looking for him.
The point that you made in relation to China becoming the power, it's people won't want to look at China as an alternative to America because it's basically the same, i.e. capitalism again. However, we mentioned previously in the podcast as well the fact that people don't trust China. And in fact, with this whole hoo-ha with Trump spouting the fact that they hid, I don't know, tests and virus samples or whatever it is, and they tried to lock down information in relation to the outbreak, are further going to mistrust China. So has, in essence, America kind of put China into a corner in which its aspirations for any sort of power have been clamped down because nobody trusts China anymore.
Exactly, and that's where US is ahead of China. That's why it's a global, it's a superpower. Because where it matters, there's no way the US is going to allow China to take over. I mean, in terms of, again, trade, they're having this tick for tat, and Trump's having all these tantrums and keeps putting their, in terms of trading, keeps putting the prices up and stuff. And that's as far as it will go. Where it matters, and where if China does take over certain sectors and puts US on a back footing in terms of US losing its global influence, US no way is going to allow that to happen. And it's created that atmosphere, and China hasn't helped himself. China is, I mean, as a citizen in China, compared to a citizen in the Western world and US, the citizens in the Western world and US, they have a lot more freedom. I mean, don't get me wrong, the West, they're no angels. But in terms of freedom and living their lives, China, in terms of lockdown, how it monitors its citizenships, and that kind of pressure is always there with the Chinese, and they're always scared. It's more or less like regimes in the Muslim country. They're oppressors in a way. And that sentiment across the world isn't there. The appetite isn't there for amongst the common man for China to become that ruling elite.
And you say about that the restriction that China sets. Does that then set a precedence for the countries around the world, Middle East, China, and all these countries, for them to yearn to be like America, and hence why the American ideology of capitalism, it rules the world, because it sets a precedence around the world that what you have in terms of governance, i.e. China, and what they're doing to you with information control and so on and so forth, is restricting you, and it's actually a health hazard. And the fact that the American way of life is actually more freer, and hence it sets a precedent to the fact that people want to be more like America. And I suppose that's another way America is actually ruling the minds of people around the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, so the people is either live under the oppression of China or live under the freedom of the US. But like you mentioned, the US, it's, although the people think they're free in the Western world and the US, but in reality, they're not. Their minds are enslaved. They're slaves of their desires. But yet they don't know that is this mirage of freedom which the US portrays to them. And like I say, this capitalist ideology, it protects its ideology. That's what ideology does. It protects itself. So the West, it will allow you to follow your desires. A man can become a woman can become a man. But the second anyone does anything which threatens their way of life, which threatens capitalism, straight away they'll clamp down on them, and they will come on you just like, this is just the way China is oppressing its citizens. America and the West will do exactly the same thing. I mean, you promote alternative ideology in the West, and we see it happening to Muslims, how they, through the so-called terrorism, how they've, over the years they've changed laws, and it's getting more and more difficult for Muslims to live their lives in the West. And same thing with US, they create this public opinion amongst society that Muslims are aliens. So hence they're creating all these laws to make it difficult for us in schools, universities, colleges, kind of stuff which is being taught is totally alien to Islam. And the society itself is turning against Muslims, and sisters getting attacked and all sorts is going on. So, but I mean that's in a very different subject. But yeah, definitely that's the kind of opinion America's created, that is either the oppression of China or the freedom of the US. And obviously, naturally, people are going to choose the freedom.
Fantastic point. Great discussion, Asad. I'm sure we could carry this on for a very long time, but really good point to end it on. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll be back next week for another episode. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.